Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, October 25th. And we begin tonight with a look at Canada's economy, which lost almost $13 billion over the past year. This was due to a nationwide labor and skills shortage in the manufacturing sector. An annual labor poll by Canadian manufacturers and exporters surveys 563 companies in 17 industries nationwide. And it found that 4 in 5 companies are facing labor and skills shortages. Manufacturing companies are having a particularly hard time finding skilled trades workers such as welders, machinists, and industrial mechanics. The CME blames the shortage on the retirements of an aging cohort of baby boomers and a lack of interest in manufacturing jobs from young Canadians. Meanwhile, an inspector with the Ottawa Police Service says he was worried the so-called Freedom Convoy could have turned into an attack similar to the January 6th U.S. insurrection. Inspector Russell Lucas testified today before the Emergencies Act inquiry. His fears that the protest could mirror the storming of the U.S. Capitol were contained in a summary of an interview he did with the commission's lawyer. While no such attack happened, Mr. Lucas says what did take place near Parliament Hill exceeded all police expectations in terms of the size and scope of the protest. Ontario's legislature is back in session today, with the government pledging changes to tackle the province's housing crisis. Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister Steve Clark has announced several measures intended to help the government hit its target of 1.5 million homes built in 10 years. Effective today, the province is raising its non-resident speculation tax on homes purchased by foreign nationals. The tax will be bumped to 25% from 20%. The government says the move makes Ontario's tax rate the highest in Canada and seeks to discourage foreign speculation. Turning to Alberta now, where Premier Danielle Smith says she doesn't want any ties with a group that brags about controlling governments and politicians. Now, that's why she says she is canceling a health consulting agreement involving the World Economic Forum. The deal with Alberta Health Services sees the province share ideas with health researchers at Harvard University and the Mayo Clinic. This is under the umbrella of the World Economic Forum. The organization has been the focus of unproven online conspiracy theories. They allege it is a front for a secret cabal which is out to impose a new world order, destroy capitalism, and force people to have vaccinations with tracking chips. All right, well, on the East Coast, the federal Minister of Natural Resources says Nova Scotia Power's decision to pause its participation in a proposed mega project is just a temporary setback. Jonathan Wilkinson says the mega project aimed at ending reliance on coal is disrupting the $5 billion Atlantic Loop project. Mr. Wilkinson says the project is aimed at allowing the region to gain more access to Labrador and Quebec hydroelectricity. However, Mr. Wilkinson says the utility's position is a bump in the road that he's hoping can be overcome. All right, moving to a new report which says not a single recommendation from the Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman has been implemented. Gregory Lick is criticizing the military's treatment of ill and injured reservists and Canadian Rangers. He says the organization is failing to deal with issues plaguing Canada's part-time soldiers. The gaps were first identified for 4 separate investigations between 2015 and 2017. At this time, the military promised to take action by implementing 9 watchdog recommendations. Mr. Lick says he is certainly disappointed that there has been no progress. Back in the east, about 160 public school staff on Nova Scotia's South Shore are off the job today in a dispute over wages. They join more than 600 workers from the Annapolis Regional Centre for Education who went on strike yesterday. The Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union says picket lines are up in Chester, Bridgewater, and Liverpool. Manitoba Premier Heather Stefanson says the province's new lieutenant governor has a history of advancing important causes. Now, this includes missing and murdered Indigenous women. Anita Neville was sworn in as Manitoba's 26th Lieutenant Governor during a ceremony yesterday, which was inside the legislature chamber. It included an opera singer, an Indigenous prayer, and a choir. Ms. Neville, age 80, says she will focus on reconciliation and education during her time as the vice-regal representative. Ms. Neville is a former Liberal member of Parliament, school board trustee, and community volunteer, and she is the province's first Jewish lieutenant governor. Stay with us. Up next, we have a look at plans for Canada's first modular nuclear reactor and what it might mean for the Canadian energy market. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is investing $970 million to help build the country's first small modular nuclear reactor. It is set to be built at the site of an existing nuclear plant in Ontario. The project is being developed by Ontario Power Generation near the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station, which is located about 65 kilometers east of Toronto. It is set to begin producing energy in 2028. Federal Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says small modular reactors are a key technology in getting to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Well, joining us now to discuss the project and nuclear energy is Dr. Chris Keefer, president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. Dr. Keefer, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks again for having me, Nima.
So what do we know so far about this project here?
Well, it's a very exciting one. This is the first SMR, small modular reactor, being constructed in the Western world. So it's hugely significant. It's getting the attention of our allies all over the world who, particularly in Europe, are eager to get off of Russian energy to secure energy independence. And that's really what nuclear offers, particularly for small countries and countries that don't yet have a nuclear program. A small reactor is a good place to start.
So let's learn a little bit more about SMRs. What exactly are small modular nuclear reactors, and how do they compare to the traditional nuclear plants that we see?
Well, with the reactor that we're building at Darlington, there's nothing magical about this. It's simply a scaled-down version of an existing technology called a boiling water reactor. So in some ways, this is, a very technologically conservative choice that Ontario Power Generation has made. In terms of the scale, it's about one third or one half or one third of the size of our larger Canada reactors at Darlington and at Pickering. So there's nothing really magical about this. There are thoughts that these will be easier to finance and quicker to build because they're a little bit smaller. And eventually, if we start building a lot of the same design, we'll be able to construct more and more of the components of these reactors in factories. That's the promise. But I really want to emphasize that this is tried and tested technology. You'll hear some people say that these reactors have never been built before. They're just scaled down versions of existing technology.
And we know these moves are in line with Canada's efforts to reach net zero GHG emissions. So how would SMRs help us with that goal in particular?
Well, nuclear in general is essential for reaching our greenhouse gas emission goals, and that shouldn't be controversial. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in all four of its principal decarbonization pathways, calls for a dramatic increase in nuclear energy between 100 and 500%. And obviously, not every country in the world can do that because not every one country is a tier one nuclear nation. Canada is, and so it's very exciting that we're embarking on this. And today's announcement is just huge because it means that we have a number of governments on the provincial and federal level that have really seen the light and are lining up behind a technology that's essential for a climate response.
All right, Dr. Keefer, about 2 minutes left here, but I want to switch gears to address climate concerns around nuclear waste. Now, in a previous interview, you argued that nuclear waste can be relatively safe if handled properly. So can you give us a quick recap of that?
Sure. I mean, listen, there's no controversy. Nuclear waste straight out of the reactor is extraordinarily dangerous. But there's something interesting about dangerous things in a modern society. We make them safe. Think about flying in an airplane. You're at 30,000 feet, traveling 900 kilometers an hour, nowhere nearby to land, right? Over the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine that. That is objectively a very dangerous thing to be doing. An airplane has 10,000 mission critical moving parts in it, and we make that safe. Nuclear waste is actually much easier to handle. It involves taking it out of the reactor underwater, moving it to a spent fuel pool where it sits for 10 years, and then putting it in a concrete and steel container where it sits for 100, 200 plus years. And the testament to how safe that is that there has not been a single documented death attributable to storing spent civilian nuclear waste. So this is an area that is hugely misunderstood, where there's a large misperception, and that's why I'm, such an eager communicator to talk on this topic.
And something interesting that I've learned recently is that nuclear waste can also be recycled for more energy. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that and whether that's a realistic method for Canada to consider? Quick 45 seconds left here, sir.
Sure, absolutely. So there are what's called fast reactors. There's actually reactors in operation around the world that already do this. We haven't felt the need to jump on it because there just isn't that much nuclear waste in the world right now. All the nuclear waste that we've produced here in Canada would fit in one hockey rink stacked one telephone pole high. But yes, it is very exciting. There is reactor technology. We only use about 10% of the energy in our uranium fuel. So 90% of that is sitting there in what we call waste and what many people like me call spent nuclear fuel. So there's lots of exciting opportunities here.
All right, always an informative conversation. Dr. Keefer, thank you again for your time today.
You're welcome, Nima.
Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. And when we return, we're going to take a look at the worsening security and humanitarian crisis in Haiti. This comes after the UN Security Council demands an immediate end to violence in the country. The UN Security Council has unanimously adopted a resolution demanding an immediate end to the violence and criminal activity in Haiti. It is also imposing sanctions on individuals and groups that threaten peace and stability in the Western Hemisphere's poorest nation. The resolution's approval on Friday by all 15 Council nations demonstrated a rare sign that Council members can work together. Meanwhile, Canada is also considering its role in helping the crisis-racked Caribbean nation amid desperate calls for help. Well, joining us now to talk more on the current situation in Haiti is Dr. Stephen Baranyi, professor from the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much, Nima.
So let's start with a brief picture. Can you paint a picture for our audience in terms of the current state of Haiti right now amid these multiple crises facing this nation?
Sure. So as you said, Haiti faces what we call in academic terms a multi-dimensional crisis. So there is an unelected and government lacking popular legitimacy. Violent and extremely well-resourced gangs control parts of the city, many parts of the city, critical infrastructure like the petroleum fuel depot at Vareux. They're responsible, according to the UN, for 1,000 kidnappings just since January of this year. They have also, their blockage of these critical infrastructures has prevented the delivery of fuel and water to hospitals and to communities, of course, across the country. And that has caused the return of, or aggravated the return of cholera to Haiti and aggravated a huge food crisis. So Haiti, in more popular terms, is facing what we would call the perfect storm of converging crises.
Perfect storm indeed. Now, what do we know so far about these sanctions by the UN Security Council? Are they likely to make any difference in the issue of gang violence in Haiti?
Maybe. So the sanctions imposed by the Security Council on Friday extend the scope of sanctions that the US had already imposed against Mr. Cherizier and other gang leaders in Haiti last year. The unanimous adoption of this resolution by the Security Council means that they may be applied by a larger grouping of countries than the US. And in fact, it redoubles pressure on the US to actually apply or enforce the sanctions that it has on the books on the books for about a year. But as former US ambassador to Haiti, Daniel Foote, said to the media last weekend, for them to make a difference, they really will have to be applied rigorously by all states from which arms flow to these gangs, primarily the United States, and governments and countries, rather, that tolerate, that harbor the bank accounts that these gang leaders and their political supporters are using offshore. So I think it's still way too early to tell whether or not they'll be effective, but they certainly are a sign of hope.
All right, Dr. Baranyi, I want to bring this back home to Canada. What sort of role has Canada played so far in helping Haiti?
Well, Canada has, so I would say really stepped up its game in the past few months. Since January, it hosted a virtual multilateral conference on Haiti in January. It's delivered, increased its technical assistance to the National Haitian Police, which is the front line or on the front line of trying to reestablish public security in the country as it should be. It delivered last weekend some armored personnel carriers to the police force, as did the U.S. It supported the resolution that we referred to, and it signaled on the forthcoming resolution that may be adopted this week, next week, or a little later, that any multilateral intervention, security intervention in Haiti may be needed, but it has to be linked to a political solution in Haiti itself. And so that, I think, amounts to a pretty mature and proactive position from Canada, and a huge difference from its position Ottawa adopted in the past 2 years, which was one of pretty passive support for the de facto and illegitimate government I referred to earlier.
All right, Doctor, a quick 20 seconds left here, but how can everyday Canadians help in the crises facing Haiti?
I think two ways. One, this is the time to contribute to Canadian and other humanitarian agencies that are delivering aid to people stranded by the insecurity and the food crisis in Haiti. And secondly, to keep tabs on what our federal government is doing.
All right, Dr. Baranyi, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
We'll be right back. Rishi Sunak has become Britain's new Prime Minister after being asked to form a government by King Charles. Mr. Sunak met at Buckingham Palace with the King this morning. This was shortly after the monarch had accepted the resignation of Liz Truss. He is Britain's third Conservative Prime Minister this year. He told media outside 10 Downing Street today that mistakes were made by his predecessor, and he promised to place economic stability and confidence at the heart of his agenda. Ukraine's nuclear energy operator says Russian forces are performing secret work at Europe's largest nuclear power plant. The utility says that activity could shed light on Russia's claims that Kyiv's forces are preparing a provocation involving a radioactive device. The Ukrainian plant operator says Russian forces have carried out secret construction work over the last week. This was at the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Moving to South Africa now, where a government spokesman says peace talks to end Ethiopia's Tigray conflict have begun there. It is the highest level effort yet to end 2 years of fighting, which has killed perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. The spokesman for South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the African Union-led talks are expected to continue until Sunday. The Tigray region of more than 5 million people is again cut off from the world by renewed fighting that began in late August. Nearby in Sudan, thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets of the country's capital of Khartoum. They are marking the first anniversary of the coup that upended the nation's short-lived transition to democracy. An online network tracker says internet services across the country have been blocked. Medical officials reported one protester was killed after being run over by a security force vehicle. Since their takeover, the military has cracked down and suppressed near-weekly pro-democracy marches. This with as many as 118 protesters reported killed. Sudanese pro-democracy groups reject any settlement with the military. A Russian court is upholding the 9-year prison sentence handed to American basketball star Brittany Griner for drug possession, rejecting her appeal. Ms. Griner was convicted August 4th after police found vape canisters containing cannabis oil in her luggage at a Moscow airport. The Moscow Region Court ruled to uphold the sentence, recalculating her time in prison to account for time in pre-trial detention. All right, well, back in East Africa, the South Sudanese government says at least 2 million people have been affected by heavy flooding since the start of this year. The country of 12 million continues to struggle with flooding. This comes as it recovers from 5 years of civil war and ongoing intercommunal violence. The information minister says 8 out of the 10 states in South Sudan are currently flooded. A pro-democracy Hong Kong publisher has been found guilty on 2 fraud charges related to lease violations. The verdict comes as the latest blow in a series of prosecutions apparently aiming at punishing Jimmy Lai for his past activism. Mr. Lai was arrested during a crackdown on the pro-democracy movement in 2019 under the city's Beijing-imposed national security law. His media company, Next Digital, published the now-shuttered Apple Daily, which was Hong Kong's last pro-democracy newspaper. Adidas has ended its partnership with the rapper formerly known as Kanye West. Mr. West had recently made several offensive and anti-Semitic remarks, prompting other outlets to cut ties with the artist. In a statement, Adidas said it does not tolerate anti-Semitism and any other sort of hate speech. The company faced pressure from social media to cut ties with Ye, with celebrities and others urging Adidas to act. In the run-up to the world's biggest sporting event in the world's smallest World Cup host country, the struggle for housing is hardly limited to tourists. Some 1.2 million fans are expected to descend next month on the Persian Gulf Emirate of Qatar. This is where expats outnumber locals 9-1. Residents say the surging demand and shortage of rooms has emboldened landlords to raise rents by 40% on short notice. Marine archaeologists in Sweden say they have found the sister vessel of a famed 17th century warship that sank on its maiden voyage. The wreck of the royal warship Vasa was raised in 1961. It is now on display in a popular Stockholm museum. Its sister warship, Applet, was built around the same time. But unlike the Vasa, which keeled over and sank just minutes after leaving port in 1628, the sister ship was launched without incident the following year, and it remained in active service for 3 decades. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.